Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Alpha Project. Today's episode, I wanted to cover some personal stories. I get asked quite a bit about my life way back when I had brain surgery and was fitted with a peg tube. And the one common thing I see is dealing with the social aspects of having a peg feed. It's quite challenging, not just for the person with the tube, but also everyone around it. I've got 5 stories to share you. This is part one of 2 parts. The first 3 stories I'll share with you. The first one starts with me being in a wheelchair after having my peg inserted. So what happened was, due to my brain surgery, I was unable to swallow. So I was um, required to get a peg feed put in purely because my nasogastric tube, my body was rejecting it. I was gagging. It just wasn't sufficient enough to get enough fluids down. So I had to put a peg feed in. Also because the doctors didn't think that the process of recovery was going to take a lot longer than they had expected. So when I put the peg feed in the hospital, it was in Germany, and it was quite strange to see something coming straight out of my stomach. And I have talked about this on Tubi Talks on a podcast. If you guys haven't seen it, go check it out. There's another story in there that I won't be sharing today, but you'll find it on there. And basically, when they put the peg feed in, I think it was a day later that we decided, because I was up there just with some family, and we decided to go out and get some lunch. I was in a wheelchair. I had a drip for my arm. I had a pump that was pumping food through to my stomach through the peg feed. We went for a walk in Germany and we found this cafe. Already when I was in the road, at the time I was 24 years old. I had pretty much been physically fit my whole life in martial arts and swimming. So I did feel extremely fragile in that chair. After undergoing the surgery, I was in hospital for close to about a month before we put the peg feed in. So this to me also felt like regression. By this time, I hadn't eaten much orally, so I lost a considerable amount of weight. Plus, I had my facial paralysis, struggling to speak, a little bit of double vision. And in the wheelchair, I remember feeling not judged, but pitied, I would say, is the feeling that I can resonate more with. Being in that chair, and I remember going into one of the cafes to have lunch, and the owner of the cafe actually came out and had to help us fit the chair in through the door and then arrange seating. And everyone looked and everyone stared at me, but no one would dare say anything. Um, but at the same time, I could feel that there was no negative judgment. There was just all this sense of pity. And it did put me in a little bit of a victim mentality or self-pity mode, like, oh my goodness, is this really my life? And at lunch, I wasn't able to eat, obviously, so I was watching everybody else eat. It did feel really good being out of the hospital, so that was the positive aspect of it. But the negative aspect was that it also highlighted to me everything that I would be missing out on. And it wasn't until later that I got back to the hospital that I processed the whole event, and I realized, like, at the end of the day, no matter what we all do, we have a choice. So I can either focus on what I'm missing out on, or I can focus on what I am still enjoying. And the simple fact that I'm not being distracted with company, with the food, I can focus on the company. And I think that's one of the things that's going to take a little bit of practice is getting your mind to change from the fact that we were going to lunch to eat something versus we're going lunch to catch up with our friends. It just so happens to be that they're eating and we could be watching them eat. And you'll find that a lot of the times, um, the better we get at that, the more comfortable we feel, but we need to be able to express our emotions regarding that. Like, it's okay to feel left out. It's okay to feel like something's, I don't want to say victim mentality, but it's okay to feel like, fuck, this sucks. The reality, though, is then once you feel that, just sit in it and then realize, how much does it suck? It only sucks because you're making it suck more than it needs to suck. No negative situation will ever be as bad as your negative response to it. Steve Covey mentioned that in his book, 7 Rules of Highly Successful People. So I've always applied that mentality to that story is like, it's okay to feel left out. It's okay to feel frustrated, but we need to put the work in and to practice that. Those are just feelings and we can move on from them and find other feelings that exist at the same time. And we just have to focus on which ones we prefer or which ones make us feel a little bit more joy. So now when I go out with people, I make sure I feed myself before I go out. I also am so adamant with this. I don't believe that anyone needs to suffer the burden of my condition but me. Now, that's not to say that other people won't. Of course, my family cares about me and they will share that burden with me. But personally, my goal is to make sure that if I'm not able to chew and eat, I don't ever want anyone to feel left out or inadequate or uncomfortable by the fact that I can't do that. Like I'll be at a restaurant and people will ask me what I'm eating, or even some of my friends will ask me if I would like a drink. And then they apologize straight away, saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize, I completely forgot. I'm like, no, thank you for the compliment, because that means you're treating me just like yourself, like it's completely natural. And this is the one thing when I do competitive bodybuilding, it works so well because if I do go out, 9 times out of 10, I'll probably be saying I'm on a diet anyway. So I'll probably be limiting what I would be eating. So it's definitely a great skill to learn. Um, Food is for nutrition, not for feelings, I feel. So, guys, that was the one story. And I think that eating out and being invited so many times, there's parents that also tell me that they struggle when their child gets invited to barbecues and things like that. How is their child going to feel? They would rather avoid the situation than make the child feel uncomfortable. And I say, yes, look, I agree. I think that's like everybody has to make their own decision with regards to that. I personally believe that exposing yourself to an environment, a controlled environment with people that are understanding, gives us the safe space we need in order to practice navigating our emotions when it comes to this. The one important thing to remember is like this has happened to us. It's our journey. Everybody has their own particular journey, and it's everyone's responsibility to be accountable for their own journey. And then if we have compassion to understand that everybody is going through their own journey, we can become a lot more supportive through awareness. Well, guys, that's the first story about that. The other one was pretty interesting. This was further on. I had already made my way back home to South Africa, and I was going down the escalators. And because of my swollen condition, I'm unable to even swallow my own saliva. I have to sometimes spit it out. And I do know that it's pretty gross. I try and do it as slow as I can, spit into a tissue, cover my mouth when I'm doing it undetected. But unfortunately, that's one of the realities that I have is sometimes I have a buildup of saliva and I'm unable to swallow that. It will aspirate, so I do have to get it out. I remember leaving the movies one day, and as I was getting down the escalators, I could feel this buildup of saliva and just collecting in my mouth that I had to spit out. At the bottom of the escalators, there was a little bend. So as I got closer to the bend, I covered my mouth, leaned right into the bin, and I was completely covering my face and spat into the bin. At this time, there was a father there. To be politically correct, I'll say an extremely unhealthy father, walking with his kids and his partner. And he bellowed out on the top of his voice, how disgusting is that? Why would you do that? That is just filthy. And just commenting on my spitting into the bucket, but not even addressing me directly. This triggered something within me, and I think it was also my own insecurity, embarrassment for being in that situation. But there was nothing I could really do to avoid that. I had run out of tissues, so I approached him and politely introduced myself and agreed with him. I said, "Yes, sir, you're absolutely correct. That is a very filthy-looking habit, but unfortunately, in some situations, things." Can't be avoided. And I lifted my shirt up and proceeded to show him my tube because at that time I didn't have a Mickey, I still had a tube. And I said, unfortunately, this is my situation and my condition, and I'm unable to swallow my own saliva. I did this ironically while they were standing in a queue that they had made their way through to a queue where they were buying frozen yogurt. And I remember being so jealous and envious that they were in that queue and yet I was being judged by them. People are always going to look at what they don't know and they're always going to be concerned about what they don't know, in the sense that they will try not to be, but I find sometimes can end up in being a little bit of judgment depending on what situation you're in. People will bring their own story and their own experiences into what their perception of your story is. So even though I showed him the tube, in some ways I didn't feel very comfortable, because I also felt that I was forcing myself onto someone. But then at the end of the day, he openly expressed his opinion of me to everyone in the area. So I felt the need to stand up for myself, and approaching that situation calmly was probably my go-to. It was hard, but I think it's important for us to create enough awareness that everybody has their own thing. So when we look at people and they're doing things that we don't approve of or don't necessarily find appropriate, approaching it from an open mind and understanding there are different perspectives will often keep us away from their judgment. But for me, being in that situation was something that I slowly got used to. Um, and I would dare say that's something that developed into my own self image, in the sense that I didn't think I was going to live forever. I had very little tattoos, and throughout the years, I've built on those tattoos and built on my body. And I was very structured on, I want to just build me and build myself up the way I expect I would like to look and be okay with. But in many times, I remember being judged by the lack of atrophy in by the atrophy in my shoulder, the paralysis in my face. And I just got to a point where I was like, fuck it. Look, I'll give you something worth looking at. And I just kept pushing myself and trying to be, um, I wouldn't say better, but better than what I was in that condition, like I was just not going to, you've got a shit card, you've got a shit card. Focus on the cards you do have, the good cards you do have, and make them work for you. So that was my go-to, using the tube feed to plan meals, getting healthy meals, get to the gym, get exercising, work on my development, work on accepting my current circumstances. Because the reality is, everything is around food. We go on dates, we celebrate birthdays, we have meetings, we're depressed, we go out for dinner, we need a break. I mean, it's all around that. And people with the pig feed, unfortunately, we don't get a break. But the reality is, someone can go to the restaurant, get the food cooked for them, brought out for them, dishes done for them. For us, it's constant blending, it's constant injecting. And even if we want to sit down and have a meal, it is intrinsically work, because we have to feed ourselves manually. I mean, everybody has to cut their food and stuff, but it's a procedure. It's a medical procedure while you're feeding yourself. And that in itself can become quite draining. So the one thing I did find that alleviates some of that stress quite a bit is I do have my family, especially my son, blending meals for me, because that takes a lot I don't mind cooking for everybody, and it feels like such a relief to have somebody else blend a meal for me. At the same time, it also feels good to have somebody inject a meal for me. So one thing you guys might not know is, like, I will chew and I will spit it in order to get my digestive system working, but also to make sure that I'm enjoying the taste buds that are still active in my mouth. So I also think it's healthy for your teeth. But chewing helps digest the food as you're injecting, and will help the process and absorption so much better. And while that's going, I mean, it's multitasking, because you're eating your own meal and spitting into a bucket. At the same time, I'm injecting. So having somebody else do that for me often reminds me of that sensation of just eating a meal and being satisfied for it. It kind of gives me that little bit of an escape of my reality, just for that little moment. A break, not an escape. A break is probably a better word. Um, and this is probably a story within a story. Even when I got back to Australia and moved in with my mother's house, her ex-boyfriend at the time had a few issues. I know that my own mother also struggled with watching me spit. I mean, the action of spitting out of the mouth is something that would put her off. So she wouldn't like to be around if I was doing that. And I mean, that was a tough pill to swallow. But what was even tougher was that I completely understand. Because even today, if I see someone spitting, I feel kind of weird about it. So it's a natural human reaction, I guess. It's not to be judged. It's working through that, the one problem I did have is that her ex-boyfriend at the time had an issue as watching me feed, and the noise of the blender was too much for him. So these people we cannot escape, and we will face from time to time. The reality is to have compassion for them because they have a limited capability of acceptance. And in many situations, I'm going to get a lot of slack for that. But the reality is, if you're unable to actually cope with somebody else going through something, there's no ways that you yourself could probably go through it yourself. And that's the one thing that I found peace in, is looking at myself and seeing that I had the strength to deal with the situation. When my mom's boyfriend, unfortunately, with lots of compassion, didn't even have the strength to watch me deal with it myself. So I'm definitely not the weak one in that story. Um, well, anyways, I'm going to stop that one there before I tend to ramble on. When I talk about these personal issues, I do tend to like jump quite a bit because my brain just starts flowing and my emotions start going. So it's taken many years to just like compose myself and share these things. Because at the end of the day, we are all human. We all have our ups and downs. And like I always say, if you hold out a 5 kilo dumbbell, you could do that. But when you do that for an hour, 2 hours, the 5 kilo starts to feel like 10, 20, 30, 50. So over 20 years of carrying this, you do get some moments where the burden just feels a little bit heavier than what it really is. And that's when I remind myself, like, well, snap back to reality. You carry more weight than you need to. I'll finish this last story, guys, about we were talking about going out. And this is a bit of a fun story. I did find there was a little bit of a difference between going out in South Africa and feeding myself while I was there. If I was at a pub or a restaurant or a nightclub, people would often question, but I guess the demographic there, also being South Africa, there is a little bit more, at the time, more violence compared to Australia. And I find that people were a little bit more open and accepting of the situation. Here in Australia, well, at least in Brisbane, I found that originally it was a little bit tougher because I had a mix between people being curious and supportive, or people being curious and what I perceived as slightly put off to my situation, but never not accepting. Um, like there was an instance here, like if I was in South Africa drinking through my tube, and everyone will say to me, Why would you do that? Why would you drink through a tube?" I often tease it's the rare person that drinks tequila for taste. So I personally do like the taste of tequila, but a lot of times, like I will still try and enjoy myself, try and relax. There is no difference between me or anybody else other than essentially my esophagus is outside my body. That's the way I perceive it mentally. Um, and I was at this nightclub and injecting myself, and next thing I know, this big bouncer literally just rips my syringe from my hand. Luckily for me, I always hold my tube with the one hand as I'm injecting with the other. And then as the one got ripped, I managed to detach him. Otherwise, he would have ripped the whole thing. And he thought I was doing drugs inside the nightclub. And I mean, clearly you could see I had the tube, I had the syringe. He just saw the syringe. His brain went to that. And he came straight at me and pulled it off me. Now, I can completely understand that. I don't understand his approach. That was the issue I had with him, was like, if I was doing something that was that drastic, you could have caused me a lot of harm, number one. Number two, there were so many different situations you could have approached that simply by like actually grabbing my attention, looking at me directly, keeping your eye on the syringe, and getting me to stop doing whatever I was doing and explain myself to you. The reality is I had already told one of the other bouncers and made him aware, like, this is my condition, this is what I'll be doing. And he was perfectly fine with it. This one cracked it. And the next minute, I'm actually being bounced from the nightclub because they wanted no liability if there was something wrong with me. And I mentioned, so if I was in a wheelchair, you'd be cool with me being in here. But because you don't understand this condition, I have to leave. And it's right of admission. So there were those instances that I found that were a little bit stressful. And even today, if I do go out in public, depending on where I am, I do find it challenging sometimes to feed myself out in the open because I do get a lot of looks, especially if I'm at the gym. But now my approach to that is like, oh, yay, another opportunity to create awareness so that people can understand pig feeding. And uh, I really do see that as a responsibility for myself and for all other tubies. It's the more aware people are of what we're doing, it's actually becoming more commonly known. So now, when people do see me feed through a peg, I do sense that everyone's a little bit more aware of what's going on. My favorite people, though, however, are kids. Kids do not hold back; they are straight shooters. So they will literally stare at me and walk straight up to me and ask me questions about my tube. And I absolutely love that. And there's a couple of times that some of them even get a kick out of feeding me with the syringe. So for them, it's I like being approached with sincere honesty and directness by kids. But the story I'm going to tell you is that this tube did come in handy when it was about playing fun games. So I had it going out with all my friends, and they were wondering if I get drunker quicker with the peg feed, or if it was usually when I drink alcohol through orally. They were wondering how drunk they could get me through the peg tube. And I need everyone to understand, of course, I've been drunk in my life. I do not like the feeling of being drunk. I do not like the feeling of hangovers. So my whole life, I've avoided that. I don't like to go to the extreme. It makes me feel ill, queasy. I lose a whole day. I've never been to the point that I can actually be sick. So they decided, no, that what they were going to do was going to try and get me drunk enough that I could get sick on a tube. And I actually thought to myself, oh, yeah, sweet, we'll play this game. So the rule was whatever they buy me to drink, uh, they have to buy one for themselves. So it's fair. So it's like you drink, I drink. And then what happened was throughout the night, as I would drink, I would run to the bathroom and empty my tube out and get rid of the alcohol. And I went along with that and kept going throughout the night, and everyone just kept getting tipsy, tipsy, tipsy. And I was fine. And then I dropped the bomb at the end of the evening, and obviously everyone stopped drinking. We didn't push it any further. But yeah, I remembered using the tube for my own advantage just to win a bet. So I'll leave it there for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed that little story. It's more about sharing personal experiences living with the tube. I will delve into part two. There's two more stories, one of which is actually a fellow colleague telling potential clients that why would they work with somebody or why would they do any nutritional consults or with somebody that doesn't eat or swallow any food. So more about that on the next podcast. Thanks, guys. I'm Pedro Alves.